Well, thank you, everyone. I have to say it's a real honour and a privilege to have the opportunity to stand before you this afternoon. I was counting the number of Valas I've been to on the tram on the way in, and I think this is about my 8th Vala, which is kind of scary. And this is the first time I've had the chance to actually do this. And before, a few days ago, I was talking to my wife about I had to do this presentation at the library conference, and it's on bibliodiversity. And she said, "What? Bibliodiversity?" And she said, "Oh, I haven't heard of it." And I said, "Well, I'm not all that familiar with it either, but I've been learning about it." And she said, "Well, it doesn't matter if you don't know much about it, because you are very good at talking about things that you don't know very much about." So with that in mind, I'm hoping that we'll all get through this okay and actually sort of come away knowing a little bit more about bibliodiversity than we did beforehand. So I'll just begin with the acknowledgement of country. The Council of Australian University Librarians, CAUL, acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, and that the council members are located across all of Australia. We pay our respect to the elders past, present and emerging for all First Nations peoples wherever they are located. So the program for the next half an hour or so is to talk about what this bibliodiversity thing is, to find out how it works and where it came from, and then look at why it matters, and then start going to what it means to the organisation I represent, CAUL. So what does bibliodiversity mean to a content procurement service? And then talk about the ways that CAUL as a consortium supports bibliodiversity. So for you lovely people, I'm not going to explain what diversity is all about. If there's any audience that doesn't need a lecture on the benefits of diversity, I'm sure it's a CAUL Vala audience, so we can skip past that. But what we'll do is look at where the word first originated from. Bibliodiversity is for writing and publishing and promotes cultural diversity. And the term first started really appearing in the late 90s and early 2000s, came out of Europe, particularly some of the Spanish library organisations and publishers. First appeared as bibliodiversidad and then further adopted by the French, and I won't try the French translation. It was further cited by the International Alliance of Independent Publishers in the late 90s, and the terms appeared quite frequently. And I know that more and more people are aware of this because people are asking me about bibliodiversity, particularly when we start talking about our open access agreements. So it's coming into much more common usage, and we do hear it now at conferences, in international declarations from publishers and library organisations, and it's also of great importance to the Global South, which is something I'll touch on later in the presentation. But if you really want to have a deep dive into the world of bibliodiversity and hear from the expert, you've been well placed to start here. So Susan Hawthorne is the adjunct professor in the School of Humanities at James Cook University in Townsville, and wrote the Manifesto for Independent Publishing, Bibliodiversity. And we can take from her some very, very useful quotes. So I'm going to read this verbatim because it really is the best explanation that I've come across it for bibliodiversity, or some of the rationale or philosophy behind it. Global megacorp publishing does not encourage the quirky, the original, the risky, the inventive, the books that will become staples for the next generation because they have something new and relevant to say. Megacorp publishing is all about the numbers, about sameness, about following a formula based on the latest mega success. It is a J.K. Rowling look-alike story, a new erotic twist of 70 Shades, or a Twilight Zone filled with zombie characters who walk like red-coated wooden soldiers. Big publishing and big book selling with their big marketing will weed out anything different, flatten it, and make it a one-size-fits-all cultural product. So you get the sense that Sarah's got a little bit of an agenda that she's thinking of there. But she does go into a little bit more of an explanation when she says bibliodiversity is a complex, self-sustaining system of storytelling, writing, publishing, and other kinds of production and literature. The writers and producers are comparable to the inhabitants of an ecosystem. Bibliodiversity contributes to a thriving life of culture and a healthy eco-social system. And then as we sort of think more about, well, what does that look like in terms of publishing in commercial terms, this is a useful quote to reference. In bibliodiversity, we see the extreme simple idea that if you have several species, but some are present in huge numbers while others are very scarce, the ones with many units are likely to eat or prevail over the others. This is what is happening in the book world. So we are sort of starting to see a little bit of a pattern here, and I think it's a pattern that many of the librarians in the room, particularly those involved in acquisitions, will also be quite familiar with. And if we look a little bit more locally, another figure that we can find is compared to the 87% market share of the major players, Australia's micro and small presses held just 6.8%. Another fun quote, just to end the quotes, if trade publishing was a grade 5 classroom, Penguin, Random House would be the bully. So some interesting perspectives on broader commercial publishing. If we look a little bit more closely at what's been happening in our sector, we can see some visualizations like this. So anyone that's familiar with Marshall Breeding, who has spoken many times at this conference and always has many interesting things to say about systems and the businesses that support them, does these really useful graphs on industry consolidation. And this is just one example, not picking on Sage in particular. There are many other examples of large publishers that have subsumed smaller publishers. This was just a good example. So you can see here Sage has taken over, what have we got? Talus, we've got Adam Matthew in there, a number of publishers and are just going through this continual growth. If we look at systems vendors, it becomes even more apparent how this consolidation is working. So ProQuest here, as you'll see, has been very busy. If we think about Ex Libris, a huge organisation in itself, innovative, another very big systems provider, Serial Solutions. Again, we've got this very, very big consolidation. Interestingly, when we sort of cross over into some more content areas, we've got Dialogue there, involved in science publishing. We've got some ebook providers. And I think as much as large organisations will sometimes want to purport the benefits of efficiencies of scale, we do have to question what's happening in terms of the balance of power when there is this continual consolidation into one organisation, particularly when that organisation is starting to control the data as well as the content. So it's a little bit of a worry. Then, as many of you will be aware, something happened last year that made us all sort of sit up and jump a little bit, and that's when Clarivate came along and took over the lot. So we're yet to really see the outcomes of what that looks like from a commercial perspective, from a customer service perspective, from a product perspective. It is very, very early days. But I think it's too early to really discuss the implications of that, other than the fact that I think it does create a general level of anxiety across many of us. So big business doesn't always get it their way. Many of you will remember this event, the Cengage McGraw-Hill merger. That was announced May the 1st. If those two organisations had combined, they would have created the second and third largest publishers or combined the second and third largest publishers into a single firm, controlling approximately 45% of the textbook market in the US. So this merger came under the scrutiny of international organisations across the world, but primarily the Department of Justice in the US looked at this agreement. Organisations in Australia, New Zealand, the UK were certainly involved. Unfortunately, the merger didn't go ahead. And I'd like to think that CAUL had just a tiny little bit to do with that in regards to the submissions that we put forward regarding our view of that merger. So before I go ahead, don't think I'm wanting to be completely down on publishers, because that's not the case. CAUL and our members, particularly in recent years, I think have much to be grateful for in the relationships that we have with many of the publishers that we work with, particularly as we progress to greater and greater open access. So it is an ecosystem, and within that ecosystem there are partnerships at every transaction. And where CAUL comes in is really in this join between publisher and library. And so what we do as a consortium, we do seek to work in partnership. And what that looks like is really finding productive ways in which we can get the best value and the best outcome for our consortium members. So that's a little bit of a background on some of the issues that are bringing the conversation about bibliodiversity to the fore. We'll talk a little bit about what this means for a consortium providing library content. So to do that, we'll just give you a little bit of an introduction to CAUL, if you're not overly familiar with who we are and what we do. CAUL is the Council of Australian University Librarians. We are the peak leadership organisation for university libraries in Australia. Our members are the university librarians. Our vision is society transformed through the power of research, teaching and learning. And we are an incorporated association with a set of strategic priorities. And in terms of those priorities and our programs, there's a number of things that we do. Advancing open scholarship. Some of you may be aware of these programs. Building sustainable leadership is another program that we run. Respecting Indigenous knowledge. Enabling a modern curriculum, and we're doing some work around OER, and it falls in under that enabling a modern curriculum project. Equity, diversity and inclusion analytics is something that CAUL has been involved in for many, many years. And very important, particularly in regards to our engagement with members and people at the fore of library practice, of library services communities of practice. Including communities such as our analytics community and transformative agreements. So these communities of practice do allow members to share expertise with each other and for CAUL to also learn from that expertise as well. All of that is very useful for the area that I'm most involved with, obviously, the content procurement service. So what we do in the content procurement service is to create consortium agreements, and for the university libraries and external members such as ANSTO CSIRO, we've got coming on now for about 120 different agreements with about 80 or 90 different publishers. Running that is myself and a colleague out of our office. And of course, the one thing that we are really prioritising at the moment is open access. In terms of the overall spend across universities, CAUL accounts for 50% roughly of scholarly content purchase. So our content agreements cover just over half of all scholarly content purchased. In terms of what that content looks like, well, the bulk of it is journal content. So journals followed by databases, ebooks, media is streaming media, which we're seeing an increasing number of agreements for. And then lastly, services and infrastructure, things like authentication services, those sorts of things are included in that. So predominantly we are journals, but we do other things as well. And of course, all of the large publishers are included in our agreements as well. So when we talk about diversity of agreements and content, it's interesting to look at the spend with the agreements. And this graph here shows that a great deal by financial volume of the agreements are very much at this end of the scale. So 15% of the CAUL agreements account for 80% of the overall spend across all of our agreements. So it's very, very heavily weighted to about 10 or 15, between 10 and 15 different publishers. After that, we've got quite a long tail. So when I started thinking, okay, bibliodiversity and CAUL, what are we doing? I'm thinking, oh, well, actually, when I look at this graph, I was, a little bit pleased that we do have that spread across smaller publishers. And that's exactly I think part of our role is to support small publishers and to utilise the infrastructure that we provide to make it easy for our library members to access the services of smaller publishers. Look at this a different way. In this graph, sort of a similar view to, a slightly different view to the last slide. 30 of our agreements are with small publishers, 41 of our agreements are with small and medium publishers, 11 are with medium, large, and so on until we get to the very large. So again, I think this sort of is evidential of the fact that we do support smaller publishers. So furthering that, how do we support bibliodiversity? Well, supporting open access, supporting a variety of publishers by size, format and content type. So particularly HSS and STM when we talk about different content. I have to confess a little bit, I think our agreements are somewhat weighted to STM, particularly on the open access side. So one of our missions, one of the priorities is to try and seek agreements on the HSS side to balance things out there a bit. Supporting agreements across a wide variety of business models. It's a little bit of a wild west when we start talking about open access agreements because every publisher seems to be wanting to come up with their own model and their own variation of things, and it is kind of hard to keep across them all. Providing infrastructure, supporting agreements across different disciplines I've mentioned, and then very important, and this appears frequently throughout the literature about bibliodiversity, supporting publishers who support the Global South. And I'll come to that again in a little bit. So, focusing in a little bit on open access and how that supports bibliodiversity. It makes content openly available to all, particularly important in niche subject areas. So if you imagine that you're an author of this very obscure subject area that's not going to be widely read. I think it's beneficial if you know that your content, your research is actually going to be openly available and freely available to everyone rather than kept behind a paywall or within closed access. So I think that's really important when we talk about bibliodiversity for those niche areas of research. Let's get it out there. And so what that in turn does when that research is out there for those research, we know from the literature and we know from our own analytics as well, looking at the publishing reports for the open access agreements that we've got, that what we see with the open access agreements are higher citation rates, higher alt metrics, and higher usage. So open access agreements, I think, are particularly core for us when we're supporting bibliodiversity. Our first two agreements commenced in 2019. We introduced a program called Fast Track to support small publishers in 2020. And I'll talk some more on that. We had 15 agreements in total. Our first large agreements commenced in January 2022 with Springer Nature, Wiley, and then Cambridge and Oxford. And although we definitely want to support the smaller publishers, it has to be remembered that we really don't get the volume unless we do the same thing with the larger publishers as well. We're certainly carrying on with those conversations for new agreements, and naturally some of those conversations will be happening here this week. And then the other thing that we're wanting to do is to really seek to support a variety of open access business models. As you're aware, this is all very new. There's a number of pilot agreements, a number of different ways. We're not quite sure what works yet. So we have read and publish agreements, we have publish agreements, we've got transformative agreements. It is going to take a little while to work out what is the optimal agreement for our situation. And I've said in other forums that the agreements that we have today for open access may look very, very different in 5 or 10 years' time. So a little graph there, a little table, large, Springer Nature and Wiley. There's the medium publishers, and you can see we've got a little bit of a longer list when it comes to the smaller publishers. So in terms of supporting those smaller publishers so that we can encourage bibliodiversity, what we do is we create efficiencies through our processes for our members to subscribe to a broad range of publishers. What that means in practice is that if I think of an acquisitions department in a library, If CAUL can do some of the work for them in terms of invoicing, in terms of making sure that the documentation is correct, in terms of reviewing the licenses, that all relieves pressure on university libraries to have to do all of that work. It means that we can actually engage with a greater variety of publishers. And then for the publishers, conversely, if we are putting that infrastructure in place for them to work with the universities, it becomes more efficient for them. It means that they may not have, because they may not have a local sales or marketing channel, or they may not have a reporting platform. And that's something that CAUL does. We provide reporting platforms for these publishers. So further to that, what we found as we've sort of gone into this open access journey, one of the things that has been really important in supporting the libraries and the publishers, the infrastructure that we provide. So one of the things that we launched last year was a set of LibGuides. Every open access agreement that we have has its own dedicated LibGuides. So a researcher can come on and find out, does my institution participate in this agreement? Do the journals that I want to publish into, are they included in this agreement? We make it very easy, and rather than the individual library having to do that, we do it for them. Rather than the individual publisher doing it, again, we've done that for them. We do a lot of work around communication support, webinars, briefing documents, but not only that, we also work to support some of the organisations that also provide other open access infrastructure, like the DOAJ, which is, I'm just having a total brain freeze trying to remember what DOJ stands for. So Directory of Open Access Journals, there we go. As I mentioned, the other thing that we're wanting to do is to pilot different open access business models. Publish or subscribe to open is something that's a little bit different in that what we do is the publisher says, as long as you maintain your subscription spend, we're going to throw everything open. And we have a couple of agreements in place for that. And I'm hoping that one of those agreements that we will actually finalise an announcement later tomorrow for that to become a national agreement. So actually going beyond libraries. So that's exciting. So watch this space. There are also other ways, other things that we do in terms of membership models for APC discounts and Gold OA. Right, so I'm running out of time, so I'm going to move up a little bit on this, finish off with the last few slides. Fast track to open access, really important program for us, because what we've done here is to provide a templated set of documents that if the publisher follows the instructions and agrees to everything that's in the templates in terms of the license and the pricing model, and the proposal templates fills all of that out as we expect it, we can sign off on that immediately and get that into place very, very, very quickly. The reason why we can do it so quickly, particularly for the license, we know what's in the license. We put that template together ourselves, so if they agree to it, we don't need to review the license, we just tick that and away we go. So that hopefully creates some efficiencies. And we've brought on a number of small publishers and some not so small publishers under this program. We're just going through the next iteration of the license in terms of that being reviewed by a team of librarians from across different university libraries in Australia and New Zealand. So in terms of supporting bibliodiversity, what we will do is to continue to seek those agreements with small publishers while continuing the discussion with large publishers as well. Of course, continue to pilot a variety of business models, see what works, continue to provide infrastructure for OA agreements, continue to support other OA infrastructure projects, request publishers support authors in the Global South. And what I wanted to say about that is that publishers for a long time have been quite good at providing significant discounts to libraries in the Global South so that they can access the content. We want that level of discounting to continue to publishing as well. We will continue to request publishers support authors in the Global South, said that, contribute to submission on publisher mergers as we did with McGraw-Hill. So that's what we will continue doing, and that is the end of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. It's been very insightful to understand where another organisation can help with this consortium and trying to work out where all the administration happens. So I'd like to give you the pin. I haven't received any questions for this, so if you wanted to submit through the app, I just want to remind to submit through the app, and I'll repeat them out here through the VALA app, 2020 app. My question for you is, because of the diversity of smaller publishers, have you found being able to facilitate those contracts on behalf of the smaller publishers, and then in turn that market to universities, has that been really beneficial for broadening other services that you've been able to provide?
Yeah, it gave us some experience with working with our license as the starting point, and that's something that we've now taken as a broader approach. So we see other consortia do this, particularly in the UK, where the consortia won't sign any license supplied by the vendor. They will only sign their own license template in their own language, and that was something that we sort of developed a taste of by doing, let's do this fast track program. Oh, let's use our own license based on something else, and we thought, well, actually we can now expand that and try and work towards following models elsewhere where they're doing that at a much greater scale. Yep.
I find being in a school, in the school sector too, trying to manage the consortiums, I don't have something like CAUL to be able to manage that. So I think at universities it's a great being able to bring it all together. Okay, we do have one question here. It would be great if CAUL could link their analytics with improving by bibliodiversity. I would like to see some development of assessment other than usage. Yep. To benefit the database.
It's a really interesting point, because we are now certainly from looking at vendor supplied pricing, wanting to take a much more nuanced approach, in that we're trying to work out the overall value of an agreement, not just relative to the FTE side of the agreement, but also want to take into account usage, citations, publications. And I think that other element of, okay, can we at least get from each publisher a commitment to support the Global South as part of an RFI or part of their statement. We asked them lots of other questions around modern slavery, about WCAG, and I think that's another question that we need to be adding into that mix in terms of what are they doing and sort of confirming their commitment.
Okay, and the last question, because we've got like a minute left, is what can individuals do to support the bibliodiversity?
That's a really good question. I think it's a case of discovery, really. Don't stop by looking at I suppose your search and just the 4 or 5 big publishers. Do go out and seek those other publishers, and I think libraries have done an enormous or a huge job, great job in populating their discovery layers to make sure that metadata is represented not just from large publishers but also from the small publishers.
Thank you, everyone, and that's about 5 seconds to go. So again, thank you so much, Agnes.